Have you ever looked up at the night sky and contemplated our place in the universe? The sheer scale of it all, the billions of stars, the unfathomable distances. Now, imagine trying to comprehend not just the physical cosmos, but the moral cosmos. This is the journey we're embarking on today, into the heart of Judaism, one of humanity's most ancient and enduring explorations of our relationship with the divine. It's a story that begins not with a big bang, but with a profound idea, the concept of a single, all-encompassing God. This idea ignited in the ancient Middle East nearly 4,000 years ago, a spark of monotheism in a world teeming with pantheons of gods and goddesses. This isn't just a story of faith, it's a story of a people, their triumphs, their tragedies, and their unwavering resilience. It's a narrative woven through millennia, shaping civilizations and influencing the very course of human history. The legacy of Judaism is etched into our collective consciousness, its principles echoing in the halls of law, philosophy, and even science. To understand Judaism is to understand a crucial chapter in the epic of human thought and spirituality, a quest for meaning that has spanned empires, crossed continents, and continues to evolve and inspire to this day. So let's travel back in time. We'll trace this remarkable story step by step, from its foundational moments to its modern expressions. We'll explore the covenants that forged a nation, the sacred texts that guide it, and the beliefs and traditions that sustain it. Think of this as our intellectual starship, ready to explore the vast and intricate galaxy of Jewish history and thought. We'll navigate through covenants, exoduses, exiles, and returns. Fasten your seatbelts. Our journey through 4,000 years of history begins now. Our story begins in a place and time that feels almost as distant as a faraway galaxy, the ancient Mesopotamian city of Ur, around 4,000 years ago. This was a world alive with a complex tapestry of polytheistic beliefs. Every city had its patron deity, every natural force a divine explanation. Into this vibrant yet chaotic spiritual landscape steps a figure named Abram, later known as Abraham. He wasn't a king or a conqueror in the traditional sense. His revolution was one of consciousness, a radical shift in perspective. Abraham looked at the cosmos, the sun, the moon, the stars, and saw not a collection of competing gods, but the handiwork of a single, unseen, universal creator. This was a paradigm shift of cosmic proportions. The idea that one indivisible God was the source of everything was as revolutionary then as the theory of relativity would be millennia later. According to the narrative, this singular God speaks to Abraham, making a proposal, a kind of cosmic contract or covenant. This wasn't a negotiation between equals, it was a promise from the creator of the universe to a mortal man. The terms were profound. God promised to make Abraham's descendants a great nation and give them a land of their own, Canaan, the land we now know as the Levant. In return, Abraham and his descendants were to remain faithful and obedient to this one God. This covenant is the bedrock, the foundational axiom upon which all of Judaism is built. It established a unique personal relationship between a people and their God. Abraham's journey from Ur to Canaan wasn't just a physical migration across the Fertile Crescent. It was an intellectual and spiritual leap into uncharted territory. He was leaving behind the familiar world of idols and pantheons for a future built on a singular, abstract, and deeply personal faith. He is revered not just in Judaism, but also in Christianity and Islam as the patriarch, the father of monotheism. Think of this covenant as a kind of spiritual DNA, a code that would be passed down through generations. It contained the instructions for a new way of living and a new way of understanding humanity's place in the universe. It wasn't just about worshiping one God. It was about living in a way that reflected the ethical and moral dimensions of that God. This was a departure from gods who were often portrayed as capricious or indifferent to human affairs. The God of Abraham was invested in justice, righteousness, and the fate of humanity. Abraham's acceptance of this covenant set in motion a chain of events that would ripple through history. He becomes the first patriarch, the progenitor of a people defined not by geography or by empire, but by a shared belief and a sacred promise. His story, a blend of faith, migration, and family, marks the genesis of the Jewish people and the birth of an idea that would fundamentally alter the spiritual trajectory of the world. It's the initial condition from which an entire universe of religious thought would expand. The cosmic baton of the covenant, this sacred promise between God and humanity, doesn't end with Abraham. It must be passed on, tested, and reaffirmed. The next carrier of this legacy is Abraham's son, Isaac. His story is one of profound faith and continuity. Born to Abraham and Sarah in their old age, Isaac's very existence was seen as a miracle, a direct fulfillment of God's promise. The most famous and perhaps most challenging episode of his life is the Akedah, or the binding of Isaac, where God tests Abraham's faith by asking him to sacrifice his beloved son. It's a story that has been debated and interpreted by theologians and philosophers for centuries. But at its core, it serves to solidify the covenant's power, demonstrating a level of commitment that transcends even the most fundamental human bonds. Isaac, in turn, passes this spiritual inheritance to his son Jacob. And if Abraham's story is about the birth of faith, and Isaac's is about its continuation, Jacob's is about struggle and transformation. Jacob's life is a dramatic saga of family rivalry, deception, and eventual reconciliation. He famously tricks his older twin brother Esau out of his birthright and blessing, forcing him to flee for his life. He is a complex, flawed, and deeply human character. His journey is not a straight line, but a winding path filled with challenges that test his character and his relationship with God. The defining moment of Jacob's life, the event that renames him and his descendants, occurs on the eve of his return to Canaan to face his brother. He spends a night wrestling with a mysterious figure, often interpreted as an angel or even God himself. He struggles until dawn, and, though injured, he does not yield. At the end of this cosmic wrestling match, the being blesses him and gives him a new name, Israel, which means one who has struggled with God. This name is incredibly significant. It suggests that the relationship with God is not one of passive acceptance, but of active, dynamic, and even challenging engagement. From this point on, Jacob, now Israel, becomes the namesake for an entire people, and eventually, a nation. The covenant is no longer just with a family. It is with a people defined by this struggle and this name. Jacob goes on to have 12 sons: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. These 12 sons are not just individuals, they are the progenitors of the future, the symbolic heads of what will become the 12 tribes of Israel. Each tribe would have its own identity, its own territory, and its own destiny, yet they are all bound together by their common ancestor. This expansion from one man, Abraham, to a family of 12 sons represents a critical phase transition. It's like a single star system beginning to form a nascent galaxy. The promise made to one man is now being distributed, diversified, and prepared for a larger stage. The family of Jacob, the children of Israel, carries within it the seeds of a nation. Their story, full of human drama and divine intervention, sets the stage for the next epic chapter, a descent into darkness, and a miraculous journey toward freedom. Our narrative now takes a dramatic turn, moving from the pastoral hills of Canaan to the monumental civilization of ancient Egypt. The connection is made through Jacob's favored son, Joseph, whose story is a masterpiece of literature in its own right. Sold into slavery by his jealous brothers, Joseph, through his wisdom and ability to interpret dreams, rises from the depths of a prison to become the vizier of Egypt, second only to the pharaoh himself. When a great famine strikes the land, he saves not only Egypt but also his own family, who come seeking grain, leading to a tearful reunion and their settlement in the fertile Egyptian land of Goshen. For a time, the children of Israel prosper and multiply, but the universe, as we know, is governed by change. Dynasties rise and fall. A new pharaoh comes to power who did not know Joseph. Fearing the growing numbers and influence of the Israelites, he reverses their status from honored guests to despised slaves. This period, which lasts for centuries, is a dark age for the Israelites. They are subjected to brutal forced labor, building the store cities of Pithom and Ramesses. Their identity, forged in the covenant with God, is tested under the crushing weight of oppression. It is in this crucible of suffering that the next great leader emerges. His name is Moses. Born an Israelite at a time when Pharaoh had decreed that all newborn Hebrew boys be drowned in the Nile, his life is saved by an act of desperate courage. Placed in a reed basket and set afloat on the river, he is discovered and adopted by Pharaoh's own daughter. He is raised in the splendor of the Egyptian court, a prince of Egypt, yet he carries the secret of his Hebrew origins. This dual identity gives him a unique perspective, a foot in two vastly different worlds. a moment of righteous fury where he kills an Egyptian taskmaster for beating a Hebrew slave, forces him to flee into the Sinai desert. It is here, in the vast, silent emptiness of the desert, that Moses has his own encounter with the divine, an experience as profound as Abraham's call. He sees a bush that burns with fire but is not consumed, a physical paradox that signals a message from a higher reality. From this burning bush, God speaks to Moses, revealing his sacred name, YHWH, and charging him with an impossible mission to return to Egypt and demand that the most powerful ruler on earth, the Pharaoh, let his people go. Moses, hesitant and self-doubting, is armed with divine signs and the support of his brother Aaron. This sets the stage for a cosmic confrontation. Moses and Aaron stand before Pharaoh, relaying God's command. Pharaoh's heart is hardened, and he refuses. What follows is a sequence of 10 plagues, a systematic and escalating assault on the Egyptian pantheon and the very fabric of their society. Each plague, from the Nile turning to blood to the death of the firstborn, demonstrates the power of the Israelites' one God over the many gods of Egypt. The final, devastating plague breaks Pharaoh's will, and he finally releases the Israelites. Their hurried departure with unleavened bread because there was no time to let it rise is known as the Exodus, an event that becomes the central, defining act of liberation in Jewish memory. The Exodus from Egypt was not the end of the journey. It was actually the beginning of a new, formative chapter. The Israelites, now a free people but not yet a nation, wandered in the Sinai desert for 40 years. This period was, a time of testing, learning, and transformation. It's here at the foot of Mount Sinai that the covenant is renewed and expanded on a national scale. Moses ascends the mountain and returns with the 10 Commandments, the ethical core of a much larger body of law known as the Torah. This event at Sinai is truly monumental. It transforms a group of liberated slaves into a people bound by a shared legal and moral code, a sort of constitution for a new society dedicated to God. After 40 years, a new generation, one born in freedom, stands ready to enter the promised land of Canaan. Under the leadership of Joshua, who is Moses' successor, they cross the Jordan River and begin the long and often violent process of conquering and settling the land. This period is chronicled in the books of Joshua and Judges. It's a time of loose tribal confederation, where charismatic leaders known as judges, like Deborah and Samson, arise in times of crisis to defend the people against external threats. There's no central government, no king. As the text says, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This decentralized structure eventually proves unsustainable, facing persistent threats, especially from the technologically advanced Philistines. The people cry out for a king, someone to unite the tribes and lead them in battle. The prophet Samuel, though reluctant, anoints the first king, Saul. Saul has military successes, but his reign ends in tragedy. It's his successor, a young shepherd from Bethlehem named David, who will usher in the golden age of the Israelite monarchy. David is a figure of immense complexity, a poet, a musician, a warrior, and a deeply flawed but ultimately faithful king. David accomplishes two crucial things. First, he unites the 12 tribes into a single, powerful kingdom. Second, he conquers the city of Jerusalem from the Jebusites and establishes it as his political and religious capital. He brings the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest containing the tablets of the 10 Commandments, to Jerusalem, cementing its status as the holy city. David desires to build a permanent house for God, a temple, but is told that this task will fall to his son. This son is Solomon, whose name becomes synonymous with wisdom. Solomon's reign is marked by peace, prosperity, and these immense building projects. His crowning achievement is the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem. This wasn't just a building. It was the physical center of the universe for the Jewish people, the place where heaven and earth met, the permanent dwelling place for God's presence on earth. It became the focal point of all religious life, the site of pilgrimage and sacrifice. For a time, under David and Solomon, the promise made to Abraham seems fully realized, a great nation, in its own land, united under a king, with a magnificent temple at its heart. But this golden age, like all things, was destined not to last. The unity of the golden age under David and Solomon proved to be, pretty fragile. After Solomon's death, his son Rehoboam's harsh policies led to a rebellion. The kingdom fractured in two. The 10 northern tribes formed the Kingdom of Israel, while the tribes of Judah and Benjamin in the south remained loyal to the Davidic dynasty, forming the Kingdom of Judah. This division created a new political and religious landscape, one marked by internal conflict and, honestly, a lot of vulnerability to the great empires rising around them. For the next 2 centuries, these two Hebrew kingdoms existed side by side, often as rivals. The larger and more prosperous northern kingdom of Israel was the first to fall. In 722 BCE, the mighty Assyrian Empire swept down from the north, conquering the kingdom and deporting a significant portion of its population. These became known as the 10 Lost Tribes, their fate a mystery that has fascinated historians for millennia. The southern kingdom of Judah held on for another century and a half, a small bastion of the covenant surrounded by superpowers. But its time, too, was running out. The Babylonians, having supplanted the Assyrians, set their sights on Judah. In 586 BCE, the unthinkable happened. The Babylonian army, under King Nebuchadnezzar, conquered Jerusalem, razed the city, and utterly destroyed Solomon's temple, the sacred center of Jewish life. This was a cataclysm of unimaginable proportions. It wasn't just a military defeat, it was a theological crisis. How could God allow his own house to be destroyed and his chosen people to be vanquished? The elite of Judean society, the priests, scribes, and nobles, were forcibly marched into exile in Babylon. This event marks the beginning of the Babylonian exile, a defining period of trauma and transformation. Yet in the depths of this despair, Judaism did not die. In fact, it evolved in profound ways. Stripped of their land, their king, and their temple, the exiles were forced to find new ways to express their faith. This is where the synagogue began to take shape as a place of community prayer and study. The focus shifted from sacrifice in the temple to the study of the Torah and the preservation of their traditions. Prophets like Ezekiel and Jeremiah offered messages of hope and renewal, reinterpreting the disaster not as God's failure, but as punishment for the people's infidelity, and promising an eventual return. That promise was fulfilled in 539 BCE when the Persian Empire, led by Cyrus the Great, conquered Babylon. In a remarkable decree, Cyrus allowed the exiled Jews to return to their homeland and authorized the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. Not all Jews returned, but a dedicated group led by figures like Ezra and Nehemiah made the journey back. They rebuilt the city walls and, with great effort, constructed the second temple on the site of the first. It may not have had the splendor of Solomon's original, but it once again provided a central focus for Jewish religious life, inaugurating the Second Temple period, a new chapter of revival and religious consolidation. The Second Temple period was a dynamic and, honestly, often turbulent era. After the Persians, the land of Judea fell under the influence of Alexander the Great's Hellenistic Empire, leading to intense cultural pressures and a struggle between traditional Judaism and the allure of Greek culture. This conflict famously erupted in the Maccabean Revolt in the 2nd century BCE, a successful rebellion that led to a brief period of Jewish independence under the Hasmonean dynasty. However, this independence was short-lived. A new, unstoppable force was expanding across the Mediterranean Rome. By 63 BCE, the Roman general Pompey had conquered Jerusalem, and Judea became a client state of the burgeoning Roman Empire. Roman rule was often heavy-handed and exploitative, managed through local puppet kings like Herod the Great, who was known for both his cruelty and his massive architectural projects, including a lavish renovation and expansion of the Second Temple. During this time, Jewish society was fragmented into various sects: the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes, and the Zealots, each with different ideas about how to live under Roman occupation and interpret Jewish law. It was into this complex and charged atmosphere that Jesus of Nazareth began his ministry. Tensions between the Jewish population and their Roman overlords simmered constantly, fueled by heavy taxation, religious insensitivity, and a fervent messianic hope that God would send a redeemer to overthrow the Romans and restore Jewish sovereignty. These tensions finally boiled over into open rebellion in the year 66 CE. The Great Jewish Revolt was a desperate, all-out war against the most powerful military machine in the world. Initially, the Jewish rebels achieved some surprising victories, but the Roman response was, well, swift and brutal. The Emperor Nero dispatched his best general, Vespasian, who, along with his son Titus, began a systematic reconquest of the region. The climax of the war was the siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE. After a long and brutal siege that saw starvation and horrific suffering within the city walls, the Roman legions breached the defenses. They sacked the city, massacred a vast portion of its population, and in an act that would echo through the ages, they burned the Second Temple to the ground. The Arch of Titus in Rome, built to celebrate this victory, still stands today, its carvings depicting Roman soldiers carrying away the spoils of the temple, including the Great Menorah. The destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE was a national trauma on par with the Babylonian exile 6 centuries earlier. It fundamentally and permanently altered the course of Judaism. With the temple gone, the sacrificial system of worship came to an end. The priestly class lost its function. The Sadducees disappeared. The Zealots were crushed. This catastrophe marked the definitive beginning of the Jewish diaspora, the scattering of the Jewish people from their ancestral homeland. The challenge now was existential. How could Judaism survive without its land, its capital, and its sacred center? The answer would lie not in stone and mortar, but in text and interpretation. In the wake of the catastrophic destruction of the Second Temple, how does a religion, a people, a civilization survive? When your physical center of the universe is obliterated, you have two choices. You can fade into history, or you can build a new center. The rabbis of the post-destruction era chose the latter. They built a portable homeland, one that could be carried in the minds and hearts of the people wherever they went. This homeland was constructed not of bricks and stone, but of words, laws, and stories. It was built from the sacred texts. The cornerstone of this textual universe is the Torah. The word Torah can mean many things, but in its most specific sense, it refers to the 5 books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. These books contain the foundational narratives of the Jewish people, the creation of the world, the stories of the patriarchs, the exodus from Egypt, the revelation at Sinai, and the laws that guide every aspect of life. For Jews, the Torah is not just a history book. It is considered the direct word of God, a divine instruction manual for how to live a holy life. It is read publicly in synagogues every week in a continuous cycle, ensuring the story is always alive in the community. But the Torah is part of a larger collection of sacred writings known as the Tanakh. This is an acronym for the 3 sections that comprise the Hebrew Bible: T for Torah, the law; N for Nevi'im, the prophets; and K for Ketuvim, the writings. The Nevi'im include the historical books that continue the narrative after Moses, like Joshua and Kings, as well as the powerful sermons and visions of prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. The Ketuvim are a more eclectic collection, containing the poetic beauty of the Psalms, the wisdom of Proverbs, the philosophical drama of Job, and the historical accounts of Ezra and Nehemiah. The Tanakh as a whole is the grand library of ancient Israel's religious experience. However, the text of the Tanakh alone was not enough. The laws in the Torah are often concise, sometimes cryptic. How are they to be applied to the ever-changing circumstances of life, especially life in exile without a temple? This question gave rise to a monumental intellectual project that would last for centuries: the Talmud. The Talmud is a vast compendium of rabbinic discussions, debates, and interpretations of Jewish law, ethics, philosophy, and folklore. It is, in essence, a record of the conversation, a multi-generational effort to understand and apply the Torah's principles. The Talmud has 2 main components: the Mishnah, a concise compilation of the oral law completed around 200 CE, and the Gemara, a sprawling and intricate commentary on the Mishnah, completed around 500 CE. The Talmud is not a book one simply reads. It's a book one studies, argues with, and lives in. Its pages are famously structured with the Mishnah and Gemara in the center, surrounded by layers of commentaries from different eras and different parts of the world. It represents the triumph of interpretation over destruction, ensuring that Judaism would not become a relic of the past, but a living, breathing, evolving tradition. At the very heart of the Jewish cosmos, the central sun around which everything else orbits, is the uncompromising belief in one God. This isn't just a numerical claim, it's a profound statement about the nature of reality. This core belief is encapsulated in the Shema Yisrael, the most central prayer in Judaism. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. This God is understood to be the single, indivisible creator of everything that exists, a being that is transcendent, beyond the physical universe, yet also immanent, intimately involved in the world and in the lives of individuals. This monotheism stands in stark contrast to polytheism, but also to dualistic systems that posit a struggle between good and evil forces. In Judaism, God is the source of all. Flowing directly from this belief in one God is the concept of the covenant and the idea of the chosen people. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of Judaism. It is not a claim of racial superiority or a license for privilege. Rather, it is understood as a profound responsibility. The Jewish people believed they were chosen by God to enter into a special covenant, the one first established with Abraham and ratified at Mount Sinai. This choice was to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, a people tasked with upholding the Torah's ethical and ritual laws, and by doing so, serving as a moral beacon to the rest of humanity. It's a mission, a calling to a life of greater obligation, not greater reward. How does one live out this covenant? The answer lies in halakha, the collective body of Jewish religious law. Derived from the Torah and the vast rabbinic literature of the Talmud, halakha is the practical application of the 613 commandments, or mitzvot, found in the Torah. It is the path or the way one walks. Halakha governs not just overtly religious rituals, but all aspects of life: what one can eat, the laws of kashrut or kosher, how to conduct business, how to treat one's neighbor, how to observe holidays, and how to structure family life. It's a framework designed to sanctify the mundane, to infuse everyday actions with spiritual significance, and to build a just and ethical society. A prime example of halakha in action is the observance of the Sabbath, or Shabbat. Rooted in the biblical account of God resting on the seventh day of creation, Shabbat is a weekly 25-hour period of rest and spiritual rejuvenation, from just before sunset on Friday to after nightfall on Saturday. On this day, all forms of creative work are traditionally forbidden. It is a day set aside for family, community, prayer, study, and joyful meals. It is a radical concept, a weekly island in time, a sanctuary from the relentless pressures of labor and commerce. It's a physical and spiritual reset button, reminding individuals and the community that there is more to life than production and consumption. These core beliefs, monotheism, covenant, and the legal ethical framework of halakha, form the intellectual and spiritual skeleton of Judaism. They provide a coherent worldview that has guided the Jewish people through millennia of history. It's a system of thought that emphasizes action over dogma, community over individual salvation, and the potential for holiness in this world. It's a belief system that demands constant engagement, study, and a commitment to tikkun olam, the sacred task of repairing and improving the world. The beliefs of Judaism are not just abstract concepts. They are lived and experienced through a rich tapestry of practices and traditions that engage the senses, structure time, and build community. The central hub for this communal life is the synagogue. After the temple was destroyed, the synagogue, which means house of assembly, became the focal point for Jewish communities around the world. It is a multi-purpose institution, a house of prayer, a house of study, and a community center. It is where the community gathers to pray, to read the Torah, and to celebrate life's milestones together. Leading the religious and often the communal life is the rabbi. The word rabbi simply means my teacher. Unlike a priest in some other religions, a rabbi is not an intermediary between God and the people. Rather, a rabbi is a scholar, an expert in Jewish law, who is qualified to interpret the texts and guide the community in matters of religious practice and personal conduct. They lead services, teach classes, provide counseling, and officiate at life cycle events, serving as the intellectual and spiritual resource for their congregation. One of the most significant of these life cycle events is the bar mitzvah for boys at age 13 and the bat mitzvah for girls at age 12 or 13, depending on the tradition. The term means son or daughter of the commandment. This ceremony marks the transition from childhood to religious adulthood. At this age, a young person is considered responsible for observing the commandments on their own. The celebration typically involves the young person being called up to read from the Torah scroll in the synagogue for the first time, demonstrating their readiness to take on their role as a full member of the Jewish community. The Jewish year itself is punctuated by a cycle of holidays that commemorate key events in Jewish history and theology. One of the most important is Passover, or Pesach. This week-long festival in the spring commemorates the Exodus from Egypt. It is celebrated with a ritual meal called a Seder, during which the story of the liberation from slavery is retold by reading from a book called the Haggadah. The Seder is filled with symbolic foods, like matzah, or unleavened bread, and bitter herbs, designed to make participants feel as if they themselves are experiencing the journey from slavery to freedom. Another pivotal time in the Jewish calendar is the High Holy Days in the fall, which consist of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Rosh Hashanah is a time of celebration and introspection, marking the anniversary of the creation of the world. It begins a 10-day period of repentance that culminates in Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is considered the holiest day of the year, a solemn day of fasting and prayer where Jews collectively and individually confess their sins and ask for God's forgiveness. These practices, from the weekly rhythm of Shabbat to the annual cycle of holidays, provide a framework for a life of meaning, memory, and community. For nearly 2 millennia after the destruction of the Second Temple, the Jewish people lived in diaspora, scattered across the globe. They lived as minorities in Christian and Muslim lands, their fortunes rising and falling with the whims of local rulers. While they built vibrant communities and made incredible contributions to culture and science everywhere they went, they also faced waves of persecution, expulsions, and violence, from the Crusades to the Spanish Inquisition to the pogroms of Eastern Europe. Throughout these long centuries of exile, the dream of returning to their ancestral homeland, Zion, remained a constant central theme in Jewish prayer and thought. In the late 19th century, this ancient religious longing began to transform into a modern political movement. This movement was called Zionism. It arose in response to the persistent and intensifying anti-Semitism in Europe. Thinkers like Theodor Herzl, a secular journalist who was shocked by the Dreyfus Affair in France, argued that the only long-term solution to the Jewish question was for the Jewish people to have a nation-state of their own. Zionism proposed the re-establishment of a Jewish homeland in the territory then known as Palestine, the historic land of Israel. This was a radical idea that sought to normalize the political status of the Jewish people among the family of nations. The Zionist movement gained momentum in the early 20th century. Small waves of Jewish immigrants, driven by both idealistic fervor and a desire to escape persecution, began moving to Palestine, which was then part of the Ottoman Empire. They purchased land, established agricultural settlements called kibbutzim, and revived Hebrew as a modern spoken language. After World War I, the British were granted a mandate over Palestine, and, in the 1917 Balfour Declaration, viewed with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, a promise that would prove incredibly complex and contentious to implement. The catastrophic events of the Holocaust, the systematic genocide of 6 million European Jews by Nazi Germany during World War II, gave the Zionist cause a terrifying and undeniable urgency. In the aftermath of the war, the world was confronted with the horrific consequences of Jewish statelessness. The international community, through the newly formed United Nations, took up the issue. In 1947, the UN voted to partition the British Mandate of Palestine into separate Arab and Jewish states. The Jewish leadership accepted the plan, while Arab leaders rejected it. On May 14, 1948, as the British Mandate expired, David Ben-Gurion, the head of the Jewish Agency, stood in Tel Aviv and declared the establishment of the State of Israel. This was a moment of cosmic significance for the Jewish people, the fulfillment of a 2,000-year-old dream of returning to sovereignty in their ancestral land. However, the declaration was immediately met by the invasion of armies from neighboring Arab states, plunging the newborn country into its war of independence. The establishment of Israel was a moment of triumph and rebirth for Jews, but it also created a new and deeply painful reality for the Palestinian Arabs, leading to the displacement of hundreds of thousands and initiating a conflict that continues to this day. We've journeyed across 4,000 years, from a single individual's revolutionary idea in ancient Mesopotamia to the complexities of a modern nation-state. What we've seen is that Judaism is far more than just a religion. It's an entire civilization, a universe of thought, law, and history. It is one of the world's oldest and most meticulously detailed monotheistic traditions, built upon a foundational covenant that has been tested by exile, persecution, and seismic historical change, yet has demonstrated an extraordinary capacity for survival and adaptation. Its narrative is a core component of the story of humanity. the influence of this ancient faith is all around us, woven into the ethical fabric of societies across the planet. Its sacred texts, the Torah, the Tanakh, and the Talmud, represent one of the most profound and sustained intellectual projects in human history, a multi-millennial conversation about meaning, justice, and our relationship with the divine. From the concept of a day of rest to foundational principles of law and social justice, its ideas have rippled out, shaping other faiths and secular philosophies in ways we often don't even realize. Its story is a testament to the power of ideas and the resilience of a people bound by a shared memory and a hopeful future. Today, Judaism continues to be a dynamic and living tradition, grappling with the challenges of modernity while holding fast to its ancient roots. Its ongoing story, particularly as it unfolds in the State of Israel and in vibrant diaspora communities worldwide, remains a significant and often central element of global affairs. To understand Judaism is to appreciate a rich and complex legacy that continues to evolve, to question, and to contribute to the ongoing human quest for meaning. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. Keep looking up and keep thinking.